Today is a very important day in our history. What a privilege it is to serve in such a high chamber as this. There's a story in the Bible about the Good Samaritan who took the time to love his neighbor. One of the most important things that we can do as a body of people is to love one another. And we express that love in the way we carry ourselves, the way we conduct ourselves. I'm so proud to be part of a distinguished group of clergymen who are making decisions throughout this nation to suspend services this coming Sunday because we love our neighbors. I want to encourage you to show that love in this hall as well and lead this country into the great country that we are. May God continue to bless you. And may you serve always looking to God who's the source, the author and finisher of your faith. We can't do nothing without him. But we must recognize that God began this good work, and only he can bring it to end. In Jesus' name. Let's pray. Now, Father, I bless these. I thank you, Father God, for this opportunity. May what is discussed here this day, as we gather, may we forever look towards you, the author and finisher of our faith. I pray that you give our leaders wisdom. You encourage us always to pray for those who are in authority. And so it's been the practice of the church to always lift up those who lead this nation during these times of crisis. I thank you for the peace and order that we have in our community and our nation. I ask that you continually be with us in Jesus' name. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning again, honorable members. Honorable members, when the business of this House suspended, we were at second reading and committal of bills. But just before we proceed, I just would like to thank the company EnviroShield for the sanitization of the Parliament this morning. We are indeed very grateful that through the thank you, honorable member. We are very grateful that in conversation with Pastor Moxie yesterday evening, this company agreed to make a contribution to the Parliament and to the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to sanitize the facility of the House of Assembly as well as the Senate this morning. The entire premises were sanitized, and I believe as a consequence, we are all in a more safer and healthier environment this morning. And so we would like to thank EnviroShield, which is a new disinfecting system for the efforts. And we'd like to thank in particular Mr. Rodney Colley of Clean Tech Solutions for the charitable contribution to the safety of us members and to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you very much for that. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to reform the law as it relates to death by reckless or dangerous driving, and to establish the offenses of vehicular manslaughter by reckless driving, dangerous driving, and by careless driving while under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and by driving while committing the offenses of driving while unlicensed, disqualified, or uninsured, and by driving with unbelted children or other persons as passengers, to provide for higher penalties for these road deaths offenses and for connected purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to reform the law as it relates to death by reckless or dangerous driving, and to establish the offenses of vehicular manslaughter by reckless driving, dangerous driving, and by careless driving while under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and by driving while committing the offense of driving while unlicensed, disqualified, or uninsured, and by driving with unbelted children or other persons as passengers, to provide for higher penalties for these road death offenses and for connected purposes.
For the second reading of the committal of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further second readings. Mr. Speaker, we do have an agreement from the opposition, and I'm hoping that the independent members would agree as well. We do have an agreement to go back on the agenda, Mr. Speaker, so that we can go back to laying of documents by ministers, and so that we can proceed with the business of this day. So I now move a motion that the House do go back on the agenda so that we're able to start at laying of documents by ministers.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House goes back on the order of business to item number 5, laying of documents by ministers. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The motion is carried. The House will now proceed on the order of business, starting at item number 5, laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to lay a proclamation of emergency.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I also beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: Emergency Powers COVID-19 Regulations 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by the recognized for Kalani. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The quarantine novel coronavirus 2019 NCOV number 2, order 2020.
Order that document be brought up.
Yeah.
Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further links.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I get into what I want to say, I had a meeting. We all know what our country is going through in terms of the COVID-19 viral disorder or disease. And we see what's happening at the supermarkets and the pharmacies in terms of the panic and the run on both supermarkets and pharmacies. And I've had a meeting yesterday morning, Mr. Speaker, with the wholesalers, food wholesalers here in our country, and I've been reassured that we have sufficient supplies, 3-month supplies, and in some cases, supplies are on its way, which would take us for an additional 3 months. So we're quite comfortable with 6-month supply of food supply, and therefore there's no need for any run. We've also been assured, Mr. Speaker, by the wholesalers with respect to the pharmaceutical companies that again, there are no shortage of supplies. We are in great condition, and there's no need for us to have a run, neither at the supermarkets nor at the pharmacies. Mr. Speaker, I had an interesting meeting this morning with a group of the pastors, senior pastors within Bahamas, and they all understand the circumstances and the situation that we face today. And the pastors agree, Mr. Speaker, that we must, in order to combat and win this war or battle that we face, we must not make mistakes that other countries have made, and we may have to introduce harsh measures. And they do understand and agree that social distancing has to be introduced, and they are prepared to immediately commence social distancing by canceling their services and continue their services via the internet net. Mr. Speaker, that is great responsibility and maturity on behalf of the pastoral group to show their support for what has to be done and to show that they put country before self. But Mr. Speaker, I was very disappointed when I woke up about 4:30 this morning and saw flashed all across the internet, social media, the regulations, proclamations, and other legislation that we would have discussed yesterday. And those legislation were given to members of parliament and opposition members. And what was appalling, Mr. Speaker, was to see that those legislation were leaked and displayed throughout the internet. Mr. Speaker, that is a complete breakdown of trust. I don't know who leaked the document, Mr. Speaker, but the documents were supposed to be tabled in Parliament today. But like I said, the documents were provided both to the government and the opposition part. And if we cannot have trust among ourselves, Mr. Speaker, as leaders, how can we ask the general public to trust us when there's not trust among ourselves. And Mr. Speaker, by leaking such a document, that in itself could have caused panic, fear in our society. And as responsible individuals, when we're talking about decreasing or removing that fear and panic within our society, when we ourselves are inciting and possibly causing it ourselves, Mr. Speaker, I think that is appalling, and we must act and be more responsible. Because when society see that there's lack of trust among leaders, then the society themselves have no reason to trust us. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm certain that the individual or individuals who had leaked such document, I here say that that's an act of irresponsibility, and I hope that as we progress, that immaturity would subsequently subside. But, Mr. Speaker, late last evening, health officials confirmed 2 additional cases of individuals who tested positive for COVID-19 on New Providence. These individuals were identified through contact tracing, and the Ministry of Health Surveillance Unit has aggressively undertaken contact tracing activities for the initial case reported. These contact tracing investigations have revealed that household members of the COVID-19 positive patient traveled to jurisdictions with known community transmission, that is Canada, Trinidad, and Dubai. And these household contacts have been quarantined and samples taken for testing. Other contacts, Mr. Speaker, including healthcare providers, are being investigated to determine their level of exposure and their level of risk. A total of 30 contacts of the COVID-19 positive patient have been identified. The Minister of Health will provide more details in his communication, and later this afternoon, the Minister of Health and his team is expected to have a press conference. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic is a threat not seen in the lifetime of most people alive today. And I must say that the world is at war with this virus. As Prime Minister, as a medical doctor, I will do everything in my power to protect the Bahamian people. Over several decades, I have seen, I have treated, and comforted thousands of patients. Some were in life and death circumstances, and the most difficult and painful days in my life, Mr. Speaker, were when a mother or child or both lost their lives. I took a medical oath upon completion of my training to save lives. But that oath, Mr. Speaker, only really became real when my heart broke and I couldn't stop the tears after I lost a patient, or when I saw a mother crying because she lost her baby. Mr. Speaker, my heart was also most broken when I watched my mother at home, lying in her bed with both myself and my younger son at that time, Renato, who is now in his final year of medical school. We both slept in the same bed with my mother that night, and we both witnessed her passing away. The speaker, that had broken my heart, and that is something I would never forget. I insisted, the speaker, that my son stayed there because I wanted him to experience that for himself. And I felt that for the remainder of his life, he would never, ever forget his grandmother. This made me even more determined, Mr. Speaker, to save every life I could. This is the same resolve and determination I am bringing to this fight today. And as a doctor, there were times when I had to take extraordinary measures to save mothers and newborns coming into the world. As Prime Minister, it is my mission, my determination, my responsibility to save and to protect every life that I can during this crisis. And I can say with confidence, Mr. Speaker, that we will defeat this threat. But we can only do this with every man, woman, and child on board. Mr. Speaker, we are at war with this virus. As Prime Minister and a medical doctor, I will lead this fight with all my strength and with all my determination. We will act decisively in order to save lives and lessen the suffering of people. Towards this end, exercising his powers under the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the Governor General has issued a proclamation of emergency. The proclamation of emergency took effect on Tuesday, March 17th of this year. And the proclamation will give the government necessary and emergency powers to aggressively combat the COVID-19 emergency. I wish to state the new emergency measures we are enacting are to save lives and to protect our country. And only those who are against such measures are not interested in lives, nor are they interested in their country. These measures are in the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Regulations 2020 we are tabling today. Mr. Speaker, we live in an open, free democratic society. Our freedoms and rights are protected by and enshrined in our Constitution. Our founders included in the Constitution the legal provision to allow the Governor General to make proclamations of emergency. The measures we seek to invoke through these regulations derive from the authority bestowed by our supreme civic law. Mr. Speaker, the regulations allow for the following new authority for a state. Where a health officer has reasonable grounds to believe a person is or may be infected or contaminated with COVID-19, and the health officer considers there is a risk the person might infect or contaminate others, the health officer may order such a person detained for screening and assessment. And following such assessment, a health officer is empowered to impose on or in relation to that person any other restriction or requirement the health officer considers necessary to remove or reduce the risk of infecting or contaminating others. A decision to impose such a restriction or requirement may only be taken if the health officer considers the restriction proportionate to what is sought to be achieved by imposing it. And where such a restriction or requirement is imposed on or in relation to a child, an adult responsible for the child must ensure the child complies with the restriction or requirement insofar as the person is reasonably able to do so. A health officer, Mr. Speaker, may require a person to be kept in isolation if the health officer, one, has reasonable grounds to believe a person is or may be infected or contaminated with COVID-19. Two, the health officer considers that it is necessary and proportionate to do so in order to reduce or remove the risk of the person infecting or contaminating others. Mr. Speaker, we need the power to order people into isolation to stop the spread of this virus. Broader social distancing of the public is key to limiting COVID-19 spread. Through these regulations, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister may, by order, cause to be revoked or suspended all permits for the use of public open spaces in any particular area or an entire island or the country as a whole in the interests of public health safety. The Prime Minister may, by order, prohibit the assembly of 2 or more persons in a public place in any area specified in the interest of public health. The Prime Minister may, by order, impose isolation on all individuals within a particular area, island, or the entire country in the interest of public health safety. Where isolation has been imposed, the Prime Minister may, 1, require the closure of all educational or religious institutions in the area specified. It may also require the closure of any business or organizations that caters to the public in the areas specified unless permitted otherwise by the order. He may also, Mr. Speaker, prohibit the visitation by persons at all residential care establishments. The Prime Minister may also prohibit the visitation by people at all correctional facilities. He may require every person to confine him or herself at his or her place of residence and enclosed property unless otherwise specified by the order. He may also permit the travel of persons to a grocery store, to a gas station, to a pharmacy, to a doctor, a hospital, or such other place as may be specified in the order. Mr. Speaker, these regulations also provide for curfews during the emergency proclamation period if deemed necessary. The Prime Minister may, by order, require every person within any area specified to remain within doors between such hours as specified in the order. The Prime Minister may also, Mr. Speaker, by order, prohibit a person from residing in or entering any area specified in the order if such person is suspected of acting or of having acted or of being about to act in a manner prejudicial to public safety, to the supply or distribution of any necessity of life, to or the preservation of the peace. Mr. Speaker, these regulations give the Prime Minister, when it is deemed necessary for the emergency, the power to requisition any building, any ship, any aircraft, or article in the country. If such requisition is ordered, at the conclusion of the requisition, it shall be ensured that there is prompt and adequate compensation in the circumstances to the owner or occupier of such building, such ship, such aircraft, or such article. Mr. Speaker, the regulations give the Governor General authority to requisition essential services for the period of the emergency proclamation or a period therein. And where any essential service is requisitioned, the Governor General shall by instrument in writing appoint some person as controller of the service. And essential services, Mr. Speaker, means any service established, maintained, or operated by the government or by any public or private enterprise or otherwise for the collection, storage, purification, or distribution of water for use by the public, for the collection, storage, treatment, and disposal of sewage or garbage or refuse, the manufacture, storage, or distribution of gas for use by public, or the removal, handling, or burial of deceased person or disposal of dead animals. Mr. Speaker, through these regulations and in the interest of protecting public safety and health, the Prime Minister, in consultation with the Minister of Finance, may, by order, waive the application of any rules or law governing the procurement of goods and services. Mr. Speaker, removing the rules and laws of procurement under these strict rules is essential. Doctors Hospital, for example, Mr. Speaker, has stepped forward and volunteered their facility on Blake Road for any ill patients, should we have such patients, so they can be managed appropriately. When we had first spoken to Doctors Hospital, and I asked them about the cost. How much would it cost us? Doctors Hospital replied, Mr. Speaker, that in a case like this, life is more valuable than money. We need not discuss any cost. Let's just get the facility ready. And when this country comes out of what we're going through, we can talk. But at this point in time, we are all on board, and whatever can be done, we're prepared to do. They stepped forward, Mr. Speaker. But in addition to that, why it's essential to remove the procurement laws or rules It's because under our system and the bureaucracy, it may take 6 months for a tender process to be completed. It may take 7 months before one can commence any form of construction. But this gives the Prime Minister the power to select a particular contractor to commence immediately, to select and appoint whatever is necessary to commence immediately without going through the bureaucracy and delay. However, it's essential that the Prime Minister at a given point in time report that selection and process to Parliament. The Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, shall, within 6 weeks of the expiration of the proclamation of emergency, lay a report before the House of Assembly detailing such as the total expenditure of the goods and service procured. This is to ensure, Mr. Speaker, again, transparency and honesty. He would also report Parliament detailing the supplies of the goods and services procured, the reasons for the use of the suppliers of the goods and the providers of the service. And the Prime Minister also may, by order, waive or vary the payment of any fees for the testing and medical services rendered at any public hospital or healthcare facility in relation to COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, again, this is important because if by chance, God forbid, that we find ourselves in a situation where more medical facilities are needed, then the Prime Minister has the power to ensure that each and every Bahamian citizen in this country receives medical care, regardless of their financial circumstances. The Prime Minister has the power to waive the fees or adjust the fees at every medical facility and every hospital in this country, whether private or public, to ensure that every Bahamian is safe. Mr. Speaker, there's been a problem in the Bahamas for some time with the creation and spread of malicious fake news. We live in a free and open society where citizens have a right to express their opinions. A free press plays a vital role in protecting our freedoms. And I am pleased that the political party I have the privilege of leading freed the broadcast media from state control. And sadly today, Mr. Speaker, the malicious creation of misinformation for the purpose of creating harm, chaos, violence, and disorder is deeply worrisome, not only to me, but the populace at large. There are people who create such information and disinformation for malicious reasons. The spread of malicious fake news has the potential to cause violence, runs on financial institutions and or critical food and medical supplies. And such fake news, Mr. Speaker, may cause widespread panic that prevents citizens from following directions designed to protect their lives during a crisis. Under these regulations, Mr. Speaker, no person shall publish or cause to be published, posted, or reposted over any media platform, inclusive of social media, any purported news or report or purported statement of fact, knowing or having reasonable cause to suspect the same. That is untrue, false, or may incite public fear, panic, or ethnic hatred. Mr. Speaker, we do not know what new problems may emerge during this emergency period. We do not know. Nobody knows we are dealing with a new virus. Out of an abundance of caution, a provision exists in these regulations by which the Governor General may authorize international or regional military or police forces as may be requested by the government to serve as peace officers and assist in the storage, safekeeping, or distribution of relief supplies, may assist in the provisions of any essential service, may assist in the maintenance of public order. Mr. Speaker, I have outlined the major components of these regulations. Some of these provisions may be invoked, some may not. I understand the suffering and the pain that our country may experience with such provisions. But, Mr. Speaker, we have seen countries that try to balance the smooth running of their country and isolating their segments while allowing the spread to continue and find themselves in the worst situation or nightmare that they could have ever dreamt of. And we've also learned by observing other countries that drastic measures may stop the spread of this virus and may assist us in winning this war, this battle. And yes, it may be painful, Mr. Speaker, but as an obstetrician gynecologist, it reminds me of watching women in labor and watching the pain that they experience while in labor. But immediately after the birth of that baby, I watched the joy in their face, knowing that they have made a contribution to the future of their country. And yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm not making a comparison, but what I'm saying, it may be painful, but it won't be painful for few. It will be painful for each and every one of us. And we can only succeed and win this battle if each and every one of us act responsible and do our share, do our part. This is the one time we must share. We must be our brother's keeper. We have a country and a generation to save. So I was most grateful after listening to the pastoral group. I don't want to call their names, Mr. Speaker, because there were so many, I may forget one, or I may forget two. And those individuals may not be too kind with their names being excluded. But This morning, we ourselves, the pastoral group and myself, had ignored social distancing because we felt it was important for us to get together to discuss the way forward. And they felt it was important for them to do their part. And just as they have stepped forth to do their part, I'm asking every Bahamian citizen to do their part. This is not a time for politics. We have brought forth these regulations to have the legal powers necessary at hand to respond quickly and decisively in this crisis. The longer we delay, Mr. Speaker, the pain and the suffering will likewise be delayed. The quicker we act and the more decisive we act, the quicker we will get back to normalcy. Therefore, I ask all Bahamians, yes, and residents, yes, this may be difficult, but they must do their part. We must all play a major role in the days and weeks ahead, Mr. Speaker. We must, under all circumstances, stay united. The government is using the full capacity of the law and state to win the fight against the virus, and each Bahamian can be a part of the battle by rejecting the spirit of negativity that has infected too much of our public conversations. Mr. Speaker, I want to repeat that so that all throughout the Bahamas and outside the Bahamas who are listening to me would understand very thoroughly and clearly what I'm saying. Each Bahamian can be part of this battle. We cannot fight it in isolation, nor can we fight it alone. Each Bahamian can be a part of the battle by rejecting the spirit of negativity that has infected too much of our public conversation. Do not join them. We have a battle to win. If individuals speak negativity, discourage them. Do not forward fake news. When the fake news gurus out there, I only say to them that their negativity, as our suffering continue, so will theirs. If they want us all to go down, then they continue with their fake news. If they want us all, the Bahamas, to win this battle, Mr. Speaker, then they must cease and desist from sending false information throughout our society. I am so proud, Mr. Speaker, of our health professionals who labor long hours to care for the sick and to ease the suffering of those in pain. And when I see how the health professionals work, Mr. Speaker, I remember that I too have taken an oath. And I am encouraged sometimes to put on my white medical coat and go and assist those and work along with my colleagues of whom I had trained with. And depending on the state of our society and the assistance that are needed, I will work with my medical colleagues and do what I've been trained My colleagues, I know you would want me to, anyhow.
Don't say that.
My colleagues, Mr. Speaker, spend long hours at work, away from their families, trying to keep us safe. Let us value their sacrifice. Let us thank them. Let us thank them for their service. Let us pray that God gives them extra wisdom, gives them extra energy and understanding to lead us to better outcomes. If we keep a unity of spirit and purpose during this crisis, we will come out of it better as a people and as a nation. The Bahamians built this archipelago with their hands, generation by generation. Each time we have faced a crisis, our unbreakable Bahamian spirit has come to the fore. We have worked together. We have helped each other. This is no fight we cannot overcome when we stand together, united across this blessed and beautiful archipelago. Mr. Speaker, we can and we will cooperate with others in fighting this deadly invader. As one people, we must make the best use of what we have. We must once again rely on the resilience, the imagination, the love, and the faith which have defined us and sustained us over many, many generations. Now is not the time, Mr. Speaker, for panic, but this is the time for discipline. And that is why I was so disappointed that our legislation that we've just discussed last night had leaked out, causing panic in our society. Trust is necessary. Trust in here and trust out there. If trust is broken down in here, we are leaders. We are setting poor examples. If it's broken down in here, it must be broken down outside. So this is not the time for panic, Mr. Speaker, but the time for discipline. It's a time for strength and the time for courage. We must be disciplined, Mr. Speaker, as one nation, as one people, and as one force. Now is not the time for selfishness, but for sharing. We must remain calm. Disorder and panic leads to defeat. It leads to chaos. And only the poor or the marginalized suffers. We are in this together. We must be civil with one another as we together face this challenge. I hope that's God. It is going to be difficult, Mr. Speaker, but it is going to be difficult. But all things come to an end. All things come to an end. And this crisis will also end. Mr. Speaker, I wish to end with these words of hope from Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the hearts of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice. The earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done. The desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shield with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." Mr. Speaker, I close with those words. Thank you, and may God bless us.
Order that the communication be brought up. Honorable members, this is a time that transcends political boundaries. The chair wished to endorse the sentiments expressed by the member for Kalani, and in particular, the sentiments expressed with respect to social media. I just wish to add a scripture because I believe it's appropriate at this time. It is taken from the book of Wisdom, Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 to 19. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable and an abomination to him: haughty eyes or proud look, lying tongue, hands that shed blood, innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush to evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community amongst the brethren. Now, this social media is a major difficulty for me because I am satisfied that it creates a culture of deceit, deception, and dishonesty. This fake news culture that we seem to have been adopting is something that needs to be dealt with in the most serious way. And I'm so pleased to discover that the government has taken the initiative to do such, and particularly in this time of crisis, when the nation is facing the real threat of death as a result of this coronavirus. And so I just want to admonish all Bahamians to live in the spirit that my Pastor Mario Moxie spoke of this morning, a spirit of brotherhood, good Samaritan. If you don't have any water, your neighbor should be able to provide some water for you. If you don't want anyone coughing and sneezing in your face, you shouldn't cough and sneeze in anyone else's face. And so you should do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Further statements and communications by ministers. Just before you proceed, Honorable Member, order that the document, the communication by the Honorable Member for Kalani do lie on the table. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after that presentation and certainly the closing, I feel inspired and protected. As they say, if God's in it, whom shall I fear? And I think the Prime Minister has laid it out very well.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, these are extraordinary times. And indeed, we are faced with extraordinary challenges. The good news is that the Bahamas has put itself in a position that we are able to address it. And that is what I hope to convey today, our state of readiness and the confidence that we have that our people working together will be able to come through this and that we will be able to recover our economy in the shortest time possible. Mr. Speaker, the coronavirus, COVID-19, has now been declared a pandemic, and concerns continue to intensify as countries around the world take strict and drastic measures to contain its spread. As you know, the Bahamas has now recorded, as the Prime Minister just indicated, 3 domestic cases of the coronavirus, and it is likely that numbers will increase. And the Minister of Health will certainly speak to that. In response to the developing situation, the government has implemented border control measures and travel restrictions from South Korea, China, Iran, Europe, and United Kingdom and Ireland. We've placed a ban on public gatherings and closed schools until April 14 to help limit the spread as much as possible and to prevent our public health system from becoming overwhelmed. The government continues to emphasize the grave importance of heightened public hygiene and the need for social distancing, which simply means avoiding crowds, unnecessary social gatherings, and close contact with one another. Mr. Speaker, in the best of times, the Bahamian economy would not escape the effects of a global health crisis like this. However, we are still on the heels of Hurricane Dorian and its crushing impact, which not only increased our vulnerability, but heightened the anxiety felt by the Bahamian people. Economic growth in the short term will be negatively affected by global and domestic developments and an overall contraction in domestic short-term economic growth is inevitable. Many people are understandably afraid, but I want to assure Bahamian families that we will get through this challenge together. And we will get through it healthy, stable, and strong. When faced with crisis situations, such as this situation today. Good and open communication and collaboration with stakeholders is important and is an important building block in preparing an effective and well-considered response that delivers the best results for the public at large. I'm indebted to industry representatives from the banking community, the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce, the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants, and other respected Bahamian economists from the University of the Bahamas and elsewhere who responded to my invitation to provide feedback on the ministry's initial economic modeling. They provided insightful recommendations on the ways the government could alleviate the concerns of Bahamians impacted by the virus. I'm also grateful to the Shadow Minister of Finance, the member for Exuma and Ragged Islands, for graciously taking the time to meet with the Ministry of Finance and for the input he provided to our toolkit of possible actions. Several of his recommendations have been incorporated in our proposal. Mr. Speaker, these are uncertain and unprecedented times for sure. Nonetheless, I encourage Bahamians not to panic or despair. This is a challenge that we can and will overcome together by being disciplined in our individual actions and decisive with our national response. I say this is not a wishful thought. The government is acting decisively to contain the spread and the fallout effects. Most importantly, we are providing a safety net for people who are directly and indirectly impacted and for the economy overall. I will provide the specific details later in this statement. However, let me say up front that securing public health remains our paramount priority. So we are directing additional resources to bolster the public health care system. Lessening the economic burden imposed on individuals, families, and businesses is also a top priority. So we are channeling additional resources for social assistance support and for temporary unemployment benefits for groups not typically eligible. Minimizing the needs for layoffs and shoring up employment retention is a top priority. So we are also directing substantial financial resources towards small businesses to support them in maintaining their operations. Whatever it takes, we will protect public safety, support the community, and secure the welfare of our people. Mr. Speaker, these measures are not only necessary for a pure public health perspective, but because the financial and economic fallout is real and tangible. No sector is more at risk than travel, and that industry has already taken a major hit. The travel industry is being hardest hit as companies restrict employee trips, airlines reduce flights, major events are postponed or canceled, and would-be vacationers choose to avoid foreign and domestic travel. Because of the issues with cruises, major cruise lines announced on March 13th a suspension in operations to and from U.S. ports for 30 days. Workers are already facing reduced work weeks and unpaid leave, and businesses across the sectoral spectrum are facing the possibility of reductions in sales, which will impact their ability to maintain employment levels. This sets off a vicious set of consequential prospects, with individuals not being able to afford basic necessities and meet their financial obligations. All of these developments signal to us the huge exposure our economy faces from the spread of the virus. We earn the bulk of our foreign exchange from tourism, which accounts for an estimated 40% of our gross domestic product, and just under 50% of direct employment. According to the Ministry of Tourism, and the Minister will speak to it, Preliminary data shows a decline in stopovers of 12.5% for January and 26.5% for February, as capacity in Abaco and Grand Bahama remains largely constrained. Although cruise visitors increased by 11.3% in January, this was largely on account of a 77.9% gain in arrivals to the cruise line's private islands. As such, arrivals to Nassau and Paradise Island contracted by 20.4%. Mr. Speaker, in keeping with our responsibility for sound governance, the Ministry of Finance undertook to model assumptions on the likely impact of the coronavirus over the next 4-month period to mid-July 2020. We ran 3 scenarios, low, medium, and high impact, based on assumptions of varying degrees of losses for tourism arrivals over a 4-month period. The projections produced by these scenarios are by no means precise and all-encompassing, as the fallout in tourism will have a cascading impact on a number of other sectors within the domestic economy. However, the outcomes for each scenario within this preliminary assessment will help us to adopt a reasonable and responsible approach to contingency planning. While the total economic impact could be as low as $258 million over the next 4 months to June 2020, we are inclined to focus on the higher impact scenario, which assumes 100% loss of cruise visitors and 80% of stopover visitors. In fact, recent developments in the industry would suggest a tilting of the possible actual outcome to this extreme scenario, which could result in a total economic loss, including additional public sector spending requirements of as much as $1 billion. Of this total, a dominant $832 million decline is projected for lost tourism-related expenditure as a result of reduced visitor count. The direct hit on government revenue is placed at an aggregate $108 million. $48 million for direct border taxes paid by visitors, and a total of $60 million for potential VAT and import duty losses. The expenditure requirements could reach $49 million, of which we are funding $10 million from dormant account funds. These resources would be used to address the health and social requirements arising from potential cases of the virus and dislocations associated with job losses and the need to support small businesses. Mr. Speaker, to provide more context regarding our assessment, the economic impact of the coronavirus is rippling through the United States, our major trading partner, and across the world. Financial markets are adversely impacted as investor confidence is shaken, and heightened concerns about disruptions in supply chains and interruptions in the conduct of business as all suggest the possibility of a global recession, which will certainly have implications well into the upcoming fiscal year, beginning July 2020. Mr. Speaker, persons are reasonably concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on the supply of goods coming into the country, food and medicine in particular. We recognize the risk posed by major disruptions in supply chain, as they can lead to critical shortages at a time when persons are already stressed. However, we must be mindful, because these risks can be exacerbated by panic buying and hoarding, which can fuel a perception that shortages exist. I would like to make it very clear, as the Prime Minister has advised just again this morning, the government has been in touch with the major domestic importers and distributors of goods, and we get relevant updates on their supply operations through the National Coordinating Committee for COVID-19 that reports to the Office of the Prime Minister. As of now, food importers and distributors advise that they have seen no major disruptions in their supply chains, and goods continue to come into the country uninterrupted. While new protocols have led to some delays in the shipment of goods, supply chains remain in good standing. I wish to assure the public that we will continue to monitor this carefully, but there is no need to hoard large quantities of goods or be concerned about the prospects of shortages of necessary items. The government has strongly cautioned businesses against inflating prices. We are closely monitoring the retail sector to mitigate the practice of price gouging. We're also encouraging wholesalers and retailers to consider limits on the amount of essential supplies that one customer can buy to help guard against the hoarding of goods and to ensure there is a stockpile of at least 3 months of essential items. Mr. Speaker, the projected contraction in tourism activities will inevitably have an adverse effect on the Bahamas' financial exchange reserve position, which stood at a healthy $2.03 billion at mid-March 2020. Based on preliminary projections, external reserves could decline by some $900 million by end 2020. Under this scenario, the country still has a manageable level of foreign reserves. However, the central bank will continue to monitor and judiciously manage the reserve holdings. The Ministry of Finance will support the measures that the central bank adopts to ensure that our foreign reserve holdings remain adequate for our ongoing financial and commercial needs. Mr. Speaker, the government has adopted a package of policy measures to deal with the tremendous economic impact of COVID-19 that has already started to be felt as hotel occupancies have fallen, as cruise ship arrivals are at a 30-day hiatus, and as hotel workers are being asked to take unpaid or vacation leave. These provisions have been put in place first and foremost to protect public health. They will also provide a safety net for individuals as we ride out together this turmoil. 1, the Minister of Health will expound on the health-related efforts to detect, contain, and prevent the spread of COVID-19. However, in addition to the nearly $5 million we have already earmarked for healthcare response, we are allocating up to an additional $11 million to cover detection, isolation, treatment, and other COVID-19 mitigation activities. 2, we are setting aside $4 million to provide food assistance and social support for displaced workers directly impacted by the virus through the Ministry of Social Services. These food assistance vouchers of $100 every second week will be targeted primarily to persons within the hospitality industry who are facing reduced work weeks. This allocation will allow for up to 8 weeks of benefit payments, but may be adjusted according to need. 3, the government is allocating $10 million to provide for a temporary unemployment benefit administered through the National Insurance Board for self-employed persons working in the tourism industry. Self-employed persons, such as straw vendors, tour operators, jet ski operators, do not ordinarily qualify for the National Insurance Unemployment Benefit as part of their benefit package. However, the government is making a special accommodations for those self-employed individuals in the tourism industry, given the unprecedented COVID-19 impact upon that industry in particular. For persons in this category, the government will offer a sponsored unemployment assistance of $200 per week for up to 8 weeks. To qualify, these self-employed persons must be currently registered with NIB, or they must register at the time of application for this benefit. The time frame for this benefit may be adjusted according to need. 4, under the normal provisions of the National Insurance Board scheme, individuals who contract COVID-19 or are quarantined because of exposure or suspected exposure will be eligible for sickness benefits. And individuals who are temporarily laid off because of the economic impacts of COVID-19 will be eligible for unemployment benefits up to the regular 13-week period if necessary. NIB published information on this yesterday to remind persons of these benefits already available to them under the NIB program. The government encourages all persons who are eligible to contact NIB. 5, the government has requested, and Water and Sewage has acquiesced, to suspend all water and sewage disconnections and to reconnect all recently disconnected services for residential customers to ensure that personal hygiene is not compromised. Further, the government is also directing both water and sewage and BPL to defer payment of bills where necessary for an initial period of 3 months for residential customers who are diagnosed with the virus or who are in quarantine or have been laid off. I must stress that this allowance is for this specific group of people and that it is important that these impacted persons contact BPL and Water and Sewage to register for this benefit and verify their situation as necessary. In other words, this is not a free lunch, and those of us who are unimpacted, we must continue to pay our bills. The ministry has included the Clearing Banks Association in our consultation on the proposed mitigating measures to address the current situation. The banks have reiterated their commitment to helping their clients through this challenging times. They've advised that if persons are experiencing financial difficulties during this period, that they should contact their banks to understand the options that are available to them, such as payment deferrals, credit limit increases, or other measures to offer temporary relief. As this issue progresses, the banks have stated their intent to offer more tailored products and services to persons who financially are negatively impacted by the economic effects of COVID-19. The banks, however, stressed that for now, it is important that clients who, because of their changing circumstances, find themselves in financial duress, that these customers should go in before they fall into arrears so that their specific situations can be addressed, assessed within the range of bank available tools. In other words, don't wait until you get into trouble. If you suspect that you are laid off and that your income is going to be affected, go and see your lending institution today. Further, the government is committing $20 million in short-term loan support to Bahamian small businesses impacted by the current COVID-19 situation. This allocation is to be funded in part by utilization of an additional $10 million of the extinguished dormant account fund held by the central bank. Eligibility would include confirming that businesses have been in existence for over 1 year, a commitment to retain most of existing staff complement, and a plan to utilize the proceeds of the loan to ensure business continuity. Under the Accelerate the Youth Apprenticeship Program, we will expand and accelerate training opportunities in the construction trades to support rebuilding efforts throughout the country. 9, the Ministry of Works will reprioritize capital projects to increase the number of quickly deployable small-scale capital works to boost small business activity. And this is to help offset the decline in the tourism sector. 10, the government will accelerate the approvals process for all domestic and foreign capital investment projects currently in the pipeline. 11, we will restrict all non-essential expenses, including but not limited to travel, and the scale down or postponement of planned events. And there have already been a number of cancellations of very important regional and international meetings here, slated for here in the Bahamas during this period. Mr. Speaker, we clearly recognize and accept that these measures are merely phase 1 response to this situation. The ministry is continuing to monitor the situation closely and is preparing for the medium and long-term plans that will need to accompany a future economic landscape, one that now looks vastly different than it did just 4 months ago. The ministry will continue to adjust as circumstances change and will over time speak to the medium and long-term plans within the budget exercise and beyond. As all Bahamians would be aware, the government is up against substantial fiscal limitations, given its ongoing fiscal consolidation and the additional appropriations that were required for equally pressing and urgent restoration activities in Grand Bahama and Abaco after Hurricane Dorian. Over the next 4 months, we expect the new fiscal demands associated with the COVID-19 virus to exert additional pressures on our anticipated deficit numbers, and we expect the impact will linger into the new fiscal year. While the extent of the impact of the COVID-19 on the Bahamian economy is still unfolding, the plan is to first utilize our existing contingency reserves and to reprioritize expenditure to remain within the limits of the recently revised borrowing envelope for the current fiscal year. Should it become necessary, the government would consider among its funding support options accessing the International Monetary Fund non-conditional rapid credit facility, which current eligibility placed at a maximum of $200 million. Simply put, we have no plans to request additional borrowing at this time, as we are diligently managing the country's debt levels. Let me say that again. Simply put, we have no plans to request additional borrowings at this time, as we are diligently managing the country's debt levels. We will update these projections based on our ongoing monitoring and reassessments of needs. I want to stress that while we make that commitment, we are also making contingency plans in the event that such a need becomes necessary. It is important, however, Mr. Speaker, that members appreciate that even if the threat subsides over the next 3 to 4 months and tourism sectors begin to rebound, it is likely that such a rebound will be slow and measured. Thus, it is important to highlight that our upcoming budget must be informed by a reality that government will likely need to continue to use fiscal measures to boost investment and consumption and mitigate against a contraction in the economy. Accordingly, while we remain tethered to our commitment to fiscal and budgetary responsibility, we will revisit our fiscal targets within the context of the fiscal responsibility legislation to determine the need for ongoing flexibility so that the government can adequately and responsibly respond to emerging social, investment, and other private support needs to minimize the negative impact on Bahamians and the broader economy. Mr. Speaker, together, these measures represent our immediate and short-term push to ensure public safety and to support Bahamians as we navigate this global health crisis together. The government is taking this situation very seriously, and Bahamians should as well. That does not mean panicking or hoarding supplies. It means being disciplined and following public safety advice relating to personal hygiene and social distancing. It means taking advantage of the assistance programs made available through employers and the government, practicing personal budgeting and curtailing discretionary spending where possible. Ultimately, the pace of the eventual economic recovery will largely depend on global factors, including how quickly the United States, Europe, and China are able to reverse the spread of COVID-19. However, the government is confident that we have the wherewithal and access to the resources needed to get through this together. As the situation remains fluid, we are continuing to assess the need for further fiscal and budgetary adjustments to refocus resources on the COVID-19 mitigation initiatives. As I would have mentioned earlier, we have had several consultations with private sector stakeholders to ensure that our national response evolves in an efficient and effective manner. We will also remain committed to ensuring the Bahamian public at large is aware of our response strategy and the measures that are available to them for economic relief. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I want to reflect on the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic is another sobering reminder of how interconnected we are as a global village. No country can wall itself off from the challenges we face in the 21st century. Whether it is the global climate crisis, global inequality, or a pandemic, we have more than enough reminders to know that what others do affects us on our little islands, and what we do similarly has an impact on the rest of the world. At home and across the world, this is a time for solidarity and unity. The demands of the 21st century require that we harness our collective imaginations and talents to support each other and to solve our common challenges. There will be many lessons to learn from this episode, but I have no doubt that, like Hurricane Dorian, it will serve to demonstrate our strength and resolve as Bahamian people to weather any storm. One of our enduring values will always be to be our brother's keeper, and as Bahamians, face the hardships that may come from sickness, dislocations, or loss of income. Let them be comforted in knowing that they are not alone. Throughout the long history of the Bahamas, we have had trying times and hard times. We have endured the scarcities of global wars and the ravages of an untold number of hurricanes. Yet our faith in our God and our commitment to each other has seen us through all these challenges. And this remains the source of our resolve and our peace, even in the midst of this emerging crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic and its social and economic effects are a setback for sure. But we know that this too shall pass. Unlike a hurricane or other natural disaster, our physical economic assets will not be compromised or destroyed. As the pandemic subsides, our beaches, our resorts, our home vacation rentals, and the unique warmth and hospitality of the Bahamian people will still be here, and they will be intact. They will welcome back thousands of tourists, eager once again for sun, sand, and sea, and culture. These visitors will, in the coming months and years, have a substantial number of new properties and new features across the country that will generate scores of jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities for Bahamians throughout the archipelago. And so, Mr. Speaker, Bahamians can rest assured that the government is doing and will continue to do what is necessary to weather this particular social and economic storm. And as we emerge as a country on the other side of this pandemic, we will remain ever confident in a brighter and more prosperous tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in order for us to avoid fake news in regards to this matter, the government thought it instructive that there be a communication in regards to the Braemar. So, Mr. Speaker, today I wish to report that the humanitarian relief afforded the Bahamas' flag cruise ship Braemar is completed, and, Mr. Speaker, the ship has departed Bahamian waters. Mr. Speaker, I wish to provide a chronology of events regarding this matter in order to fully appraise Bahamians of the sequence of events that led to the resolution of this matter. Mr. Speaker, we were initially advised via email on the 11th of March, 2020, that the cruise ship Braemar was en route to Barbados with a confirmed COVID virus case, looking for a port of call to dock. The ship was denied entry into Barbados, which was its home port, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the ship entered Bahamian territorial waters on the 13th of March, 2020, with a crew of 381 and 682 passengers, including citizens from 33 countries. More than 97% of the ship's passengers were of British nationality, and more than 90% were over the age of 60. Mr. Speaker, a few people on board had tested positive for COVID-19, and the ship, which had been on a Caribbean itinerary, had already been denied entry into several Caribbean ports, as I said again, including Barbados. The owners of the cruise ship, Fred Olsen Cruise Lines, opened dialogue with the Bahamas since it was registered under our flag. They also engaged the UK authorities due to the fact that there were hundreds of British citizens on board. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas government's course of action was to immediately establish an interagency team which comprised of representatives of the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Transport and Local Government, the Bahamas Maritime Authority, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Health, all at the highest level, to set the Bahamas' policy and establish parameters for this national issue. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Transport and Local Government, yours truly, and the Minister of Grand Bahama headed this team, whose remit was to set policies and action points to interface with the government of the United Kingdom. The Minister of Disaster Management and Reconstruction, Iram Lewis, also offered invaluable advice to the operations team. Mr. Speaker, the ship's owners requested the Bahamas' assistance with supplying the vessel with essential medical supplies, provisions, and fuel, and also for the disposal of refuse and the disembarkation and repatriation of passengers, which they anticipated would occur at a dock and other facilities in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas government, however, did not allow the ship to dock at a Bahamian port or berth and advised that any discharge from the ship were prohibited in Bahamian waters. Further, Mr. Speaker, we declined to accept any refuge from the ship and did not allow any disembarkation whatsoever and or repatriation from the Bahamas by any of the passengers in light of the broader health risk posed. Mr. Speaker, we did, however, offer to provide humanitarian relief to the ship without the ship docking at a Bahamian port. The conditions advised were that this would occur at a location out at sea where the ship would be given aid in an isolated area. Acting Port Controller, Lieutenant Commander Byrne Wright, assisted in this endeavor by identifying a temporary safe anchorage site for the ship in a remote area in the Great Isaacs Bank, which is some 25 nautical miles from Freeport, where the required humanitarian operation could be safely carried out. Mr. Speaker, permit me to now provide a more comprehensive and detailed timeline for the cruise ship Braemar's arrival to its departure from Bahamian territorial waters. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the 13th of March, 2020, the Braemar entered Bahamian territorial waters from the south. The vessel was reported at the time to have on board again 5 persons, that is 1 passenger and 4 crew members with confirmed cases of COVID-19, and a number of persons in quarantine at the time with flu-like symptoms. The Bahamas interagency team held a telephone conference call, which was joined in part by the UK High Commissioner to the Bahamas to review possible arrangements. British officials requested that a few medical and support personnel and 6 additional new crew members be allowed to embark the ship during the Bahamas humanitarian operations. Mr. Speaker, it was made unequivocally clear that no one again would disembark the ship in the Bahamas. Our next course of action was to establish an on-site team for Freeport and the Great Isaacs Bank operation. The team, again, as I said, Mr. Speaker, was headed by Acting Port Controller Byrne Wright and representative of the Chief Medical Office in the person of Dr. Bartlett and Dr. Hagee of Freeport, both of whom provided invaluable assistance on the ground. The ship's managers were advised of the location of refuge, and the conditions for the planned operations were discussed. The ship's managers provided details of their proposed arrangements for refueling, details of the embarking of the new crew, and identification of the local ship's agents were provided. The proposed plan was reviewed by our acting port controller and medical officers representatives, who made amendments to the plan to ensure that best safety and best practices were employed at all times. Mr. Speaker, 6 new crew members arrived in Nassau, here in the capital, and were cleared in charge of the ship's agent, who subsequently transferred the new crew to Freeport. The next day, which was Saturday the 14th of March 2020, the ship arrived at the identified anchorage point, and the acting port controller Byrne Wright also arrived in Freeport to act as the on-scene coordinator for the proposed operation. The proposed operational plans were further fine-tuned. Additional control measures and protocols were also introduced. Mr. Speaker, on the second day of the plan, Sunday, the 15th of March, 2020, in keeping with the operational plans, the Bahamian tug crew were all fully briefed and provided with appropriate protective gear prior to departure. A barge, Mr. Speaker, with the provisions and the new crew members who had flown in was towed by the tug from Freeport to a designated point in the vicinity of the vessel Braemar and anchored at that location. It is important to note here, Mr. Speaker, that the provisions on the barge were then loaded onto the Braemar by the Braemar's crew, with no physical contact of any nature between the Bahamian crew and any Braemar personnel. The new medical personnel from the United Kingdom bound for the ship arrived in Freeport after air transfer from Nassau, and they too, with the arrangements, was transferred to the ship, which was reviewed by the on-scene coordinator and his team, with agreed control measures and medical controls introduced. Mr. Speaker, the medical team was transferred to the ship by launch, and they boarded without any contact between the ship or the launch personnel, who had been fully briefed and equipped regarding the proper medical protocols. Mr. Speaker, on the final day of the operation, which was Monday the 16th of March 2020, the Braemar ship departed Bahamian territorial waters with its full complement of passengers, crew, and personnel. Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise, as a precautionary measure, the barge used in the operation will remain on its own at anchorage at sea for a period of 72 hours before the Bahamas' medical authorities initiate a complete cleaning and disinfecting process. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to also report that the ship owners were fully cooperative throughout the operation. Additionally, it is instructive that at all stages of the operation, none of the passengers left the ship, and there was no contact again whatsoever between the ship's crew and the Bahamian tug or crew. Mr. Speaker, the success of this aspects of the operation was contingent on the involvement and coordination by our on-scene persons in Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, we would like to thank Lieutenant Commander Burnwright, with the support and assistance of Captain Dwayne Hutchinson and the Bahamas Maritime Authority and the representative of the Chief Medical Officer. Mr. Speaker, we are all keenly aware of the devastating impact that this pandemic has had on many countries in the world. We must all acknowledge, however, that challenges will continue to abound in combating its spread. Ultimately, however, we have to determine what is in the best interest of the Bahamian people. And Mr. Speaker, that is paramount. Notwithstanding, we continue to pray for the safe and successful passage and well-being of the passengers and crew of the cruise ship Braemar. The government of the Bahamas, by way of the Bahamas Maritime Authority, will continue to be in constant communication with the owners of Braemar, and in so doing, we will continue to update the Bahamian people as warranted. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I wish to embrace this opportunity to thank also the numerous persons who came together, whether hands-on or remotely, to ensure the successful outcome of this operation, and invariably for the safety and well-being and best interests of all Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and may Yahweh Elohim continue to bless and protect us all.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for South Beach.
Yes, sir. May it please the Honorable Speaker. On Sunday night past, March 15, Ministry of Education issued a press statement in light of the recently confirmed case of the coronavirus in the Bahamas, announcing the immediate closure of all schools and educational institutions, both public and private, until Tuesday, April 14, 2020. In that statement, the ministry advised the teachers and students were not to report to school. However, administrators, support staff, security personnel would report beginning on Monday, March 16, 2020, and to await further instruction. Meanwhile, all staff, the Ministry of Education headquarters, and various satellite offices will also report to work as usual and also to await further instruction. Today, Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of the general public and all persons connected to education, that is, educational leaders, superintendents, principals, administrators, teachers, other staff, parents, and stakeholders, bring the following update as we negotiate this most treacherous pandemic in living memory. Reality, sir, as was stated copiously here today, is that we are in a national and international public health crisis, evolving as we speak. The Bahamas has never been here before. Each day, the science community is learning more and more about the coronavirus, which means that each day, our response will have to adjust to conform to these new realities. This is a frontier experience for the world, including the Bahamas. So everybody must participate consciously, with patience, with keen alertness to the ever-changing demands that may be placed upon each of us. The educational sector is no different. This is why regular and frequent updates will be given, unto which the ministry asks each of its stakeholders to pay very close attention. I wish to state here, sir, that I am grateful to our stakeholders who have exhibited understanding, wisdom, patience, and cooperation. Our leadership cares very deeply for every member of our team and appreciates their value and honors their inestimable contribution that they continue to make. They are to be advised that whatever decision is made recognizes that honor. And as one union leader stated in the media today, all hands on deck. The Ministry of Education staff members are strongly cautioned to observe the protocols provided by the World Health Organization. They are critical to the safety, health, and well-being of everybody. What the science and best practices have made abundantly clear, Mr. Speaker, is that aggressive action coupled with insistent social distancing have proven to be the most effective deterrents to the spread of this virus. Countries who have not heeded these vital responses are now faced with their own public health crises. That is why the decision was taken to close schools immediately to effect the necessary protocols in the fight of this global scourge. Parents and guardians are encouraged to adhere rigorously to the hygienic guidelines outlined by the WHO and to ensure that their children and those in their care do the same. These include regularly and thoroughly washing their hands for 20 seconds with soap and water, and where that is not possible, using a 60% alcohol-based sanitizer, maintaining at least a 3-foot distance between yourself and others, especially anyone who is coughing or sneezing, avoiding touching eyes, nose, and mouth, avoiding handshaking and hugging, and practicing respiratory hygiene, which includes covering your mouth and nose with your bent elbow on tissue when you cough or sneeze, and then disposing of the used tissue immediately. Staying at home if you feel unwell even with mild symptoms such as a headache or slightly running nose till you recover. Staying informed and following advice given by the healthcare providers. Persons who have known medical conditions and are at a high risk are asked to stay at home. And as we announced in the press statement, today I provide additional details on the upcoming examinations, the recently launched virtual school, the lunch programs, and other areas of special needs. Mr. Speaker, some colleagues were concerned that the reason for school closure is not clear, and I have asked that I bring clarity to this matter. Students and teachers constitute the bulk of persons on a campus. Social distancing is among the most vital observances that we can enact. Removing such students and teachers from the school reduces the number of people and therefore ensures that the social spacing issue is addressed. The few remaining, that is administrators, support staff, and security, will not create a potentially unsafe environment because of crowding. And also, as for other government establishments, the work of government must continue. Assessment of school summer repairs, work to school buildings, record keeping, registration and updates of student records, lunch distribution to indigent children, among other tasks, still must carry on. Now that a few days have passed since the closing of schools, principals are directed to reduce staff to a skeleton crew, alternating them so that the business of school can continue, so that security can be maintained on campus, so that no staff is disadvantaged, and so that we can ensure that the social distancing regime is maintained. However, as indicated, the school campus still must be maintained, and the Director of Education will give further specifics to this as necessary. As I indicated earlier, sir, janitorial and clerical staff are to be put on a rotation system immediately. And those staff members, janitorial, are to thoroughly clean all campuses using the protective equipment that will be provided. All security officers are reported to work each day for their entire shift. Those that have large amounts of vacation time or holiday days that may have been accumulated are advised to apply to take those days at this time. Mr. Speaker, though teachers and students are away from campus at this time, it does not mean that they are away from their learning and teaching responsibilities. Our school system has already lost precious instructional and learning time due to Hurricane Dorian. We cannot afford a single day further in lost educational time. Therefore, the following must be observed. Teachers are to continue to engage students through the media groups that they have already established. Where that has not been done, they are directed to report to school, maintaining social distance, secure the register of their students, while securing also useful educational materials, and to create such groups with the assistance of the school's management director and the director of education. The 1,650 students who are now registered on our virtual school will continue to receive their instructions from teachers immediately. Additionally, based on the plan developed by our technical team over the last 2 days, on March the 30th, the live instruction will be provided by our teachers, particularly for our 12th graders. I wish to say, sir, that we are extremely proud of the scores of teachers who have come forward to offer their support and who are committed themselves to working with our virtual learning platform. In this scenario, we will also be able to develop our own educational resources that will give us the internal capacity to deal with this COVID-19 crisis, but also any other crisis that may occur in the future. Accordingly, we will be calling upon all teachers to play various roles in this process, such as presenting lessons, working with students in smaller groups in order to cater to individual learning needs and to give more focus on the assessment and evaluation of student performances. We also will invite and do invite teachers to embrace this new reality, which presents us opportunities to better support the direct learning needs of our students. Mr. Speaker, please note that the virtual school platform is now being upgraded, which will be ready in full force for the accommodation of over 100,000 students by Monday, March the 23rd, 2020. As of this date, some 50 teachers have been trained for this platform. Additionally, the one-on-one online learning facility that is now facilitated by cable and wireless through the Bahamas Telecommunications Corporation, BTC, is providing after-school and weekend personalized sessions, and this too will be also expanded by the 23rd of this month. Teachers are encouraged and will be allowed to use their personal devices, or they can go on campus and use those devices which are available there. And through this facility and BTC and our virtual platform, remote conferencing capability is now being stored so that Ministry of Education leaders can communicate with all superintendents and administrators in order to disseminate and receive information remotely. By this Friday, March the 20th, the homeschooling unit will be providing tips for parents working with their children at home. The ministry will publish consistently and frequently public service announcements, send messages through WhatsApp, Facebook, and the ministry's website. As you will remember, Mr. Speaker, through the launch of the virtual school in September of 2019, there are now more than 1,600 students who are benefiting from this facility. This will also enable the continuing, as we said, learning and instructional experience for our students and teachers. A learning schedule this Monday beginning will be available for all students. And this will be accessed through a portal on the Ministry of Education's webpage. It will simply be called virtual learning. So parents and students are invited to go to the Ministry of Education's webpage, that is Ministry of Education Bahamas, one word, and click on the portal that will be made available for you. For preschool and primary students, parents are advised that be able to access topics that will be supported by videos, links, games, and activities to support each of their children's topic, like maths and English and social sciences. They will also be able to download PDF documents to have the students practice their learning objectives in their various subject matters. Additionally, there will be on those websites, sir, activities for students at, below, or even above their respective grade level so that they can practice at their own pace. For those students without internet access, parents are invited to call the school and request the relevant material, and the school will print out such resources on their demand. They are asked to call the school. Teachers have not been left out of this, Mr. Speaker. They will also be through this portal on the Ministry of Education's webpage, be given tutorials to enable them to better equip themselves for use of these tech facilities. That portal will be, as I said, on the Ministry of Education's webpage, Ministry of Education Bahamas.com. There's a deep concern in our system, Mr. Speaker, as a result of this circumstance, of those students who are going to be taking their exit exams come May, June, and into July, our 12th graders. Beginning on March the 30th, 2 weeks from this past Monday, 12th graders, that's secondary students even, 10, 11, and 12, will have live classes in the core subject areas, English, maths, and so on. They will additionally have optional subjects upon their request. As you have heard, we will conquer this malady only if all hands are on deck, which means that everyone must take on the responsibility of our children's continuing education, parents, educators, and all stakeholders. I am to advise, Mr. Speaker, that there exists in our educational system some 4,200 plus students who depend on schools for their meals. And as a consequence of schools' closure, those students are at a significant risk. Therefore, beginning this Monday, Ministry of Education will provide meal vouchers for students and invite parents to call and come to the school to collect such vouchers for their children. The ministry will engage the vendors who now provide lunch on the various school campuses on a rotational basis for these purposes. We have also provided a cell phone, or rather a toll number, so that parents and others may call the ministry to secure additional information. That number is 300-2320-2320 or 300-2319. Also would like to advise that in this time, when some psychosocial support may be required, we will be working in the morning for cell phones provided for guidance counselors who will man those phones from 8 to 4 for non-academic and psychiatric support. Mr. Speaker, one of the, I almost said casualties, but not necessarily so. Well, one of the circumstances that this situation now imposes is how to deal with the exit exams, which in some cases have already begun, where students have to submit their coursework. The Ministry of Education's leadership, in collaboration with Cambridge, the examination company out of England, now working with a decision on the extension of the examination timetable. This is now being finalized, and I invite all persons to please pay very close attention to future announcements that will come forth in just a matter of days. I also want to advise that students who need help with their final preparations for examinations and so on, parents and guardians and caregivers, administrators are asked to ensure that these students pay close attention to the web page that is provided, the instructional materials that are provided, and to understand the necessity of maintaining their academic focus during this very critical time. As you would expect, whenever school resumes, which is now targeted for April the 14th, because of the lost time, presumably, that may impose upon us, Ministry of Education has taken the decision that it will eliminate all non-instructional or non-essential observances in school, such as fun days, field trips, special assemblies, and sports days. Additionally, the ministry will provide opportunities for afternoon and weekend instructions once students return to campus. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that this is already ongoing in our school system, but just as an advice and a reminder and information for the benefit of our Bahamian people. I turn my attention now to the university.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the indulgence of the member for South Beach, but I rise to move a resolution that be it resolved that the business of this House do continue beyond 1 p.m. today. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. The chair recognizes the honorable member for South Beach.
Before the University of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, I wish also to make another announcement with regard to scholarships. As would have been announced earlier, the scholarships or applications for scholarships for tuition assistance from the government of the Bahamas, the deadline would have been March 31st, 2020. The Ministry of Education extends that deadline to April 30th, 2020. Interested, suitably qualified applicants are invited to go to scholarshipsbahamas.com and make the application accordingly and ensure that all relevant necessary documents are uploaded and ensure that the application process is completed. What we have found in recent times, Mr. Speaker, is that many students leave out one or more important documents thinking that that is satisfactory. And then come August, when the decision is made for tuition assistance, they don't qualify because their application is incomplete. So it is very important that they make sure that by the 30th of April, they upload all required documents. You can go on scholarshipsbahamas.com and review the requirements for tuition assistance in the Bahamas. and review at the same time the areas of focus for scholarship qualification. University of the Bahamas. This past Monday, the UB campuses, centers, and business operations, including the Oaksville campus, Grosvenor Close Center, and the UB North campuses in Grand Bahama, transitioned to remote operations until further notice. Additionally, Chapter 1 bookstore is now closed until further notice, and all events scheduled for the remainder of the spring semester 2020 are now canceled or postponed until further notice. This includes the spring 2020 commencement ceremony. There will be announcement further on this ceremony at some later date. As a result of the remote instructions and communications, which commenced this past Monday, students are requested to use online applications, including Moodle and Zoom. Faculty and students' communications on course content will continue via online channels. A decision will be made and communicated by Friday, March the 20th. It is also noted, sir, that laboratory and practicum classes, teaching, kitchen classes, and internships are suspended until further notice. Any student or faculty needing assistance with remote instruction should contact the IT Help Desk at 302-4588 or ithelpdesk, one word, at ub.edu.bs. The academic affairs faculty and staff will be permitted to access their offices on Monday, 16th of March to secure their offices only. In terms of the residential life of the university, students who are residing in university dorms are advised to gather their belongings and initiate arrangements to leave their dorms and return home effective immediately. Students who are not in a position to do so are asked to contact the Director of Residential Life and Housing and the Dean of Students at either 422-6429 or 424-8559. Public is hereby advised in respect of UB to use all available online resources to complete business transactions where possible during this interim period. I speak now finally, sir, about BTVI. Effective March the 16th, that's past Monday, all face-to-face classes at BTVI have been canceled until April 14, 2020. This, of course, is for the safety and health, students, faculty, and administration and staff. Only a limited staff and limited services will now remain on campus for the benefit of the aforementioned services that I have given earlier, Mr. Speaker. Updates on the services available at BTVI will be posted on social media as well as the BTVI website. As you would have known, many classes have been and are being moved to an online format. And training on the use of the online facility has been made and is being made available to all faculty. In particular, BTVI will use technology to enhance course content until the end of the term. In light also of this global issue, Mr. Speaker, I wish to make an announcement with regard to NACOB, the National Accreditation and Equivalency Council of the Bahamas, NACOB. It states thus: as of March 2020, NACOB will recognize all online programs completed at institutions that have been accredited by agencies acknowledged by NACOB. Programs completed by institutions not recognized by NACOB prior to March 2020 will not be accepted. Mr. Speaker, as further investigations, the recently reported COVID-19 cases are not yet completed. The Ministry of Education is guided by the need to exercise great vigilance. This is an evolving circumstance. Therefore, as this country is now braced to guard against the spread of this illness in our community, it is imperative that every member of the Ministry of Education's family, indeed, every resident and citizen of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, realize the vital role that we all play in its containment. Ministry reiterates the importance each citizen vigorously follow the protocols outlined by the WHO in conjunction with the Bahamas Ministry of Health. The Prime Minister stated in his national address and again today, fake news is very prevalent. Therefore, be sure to pay attention only to credible and reliable news sources. With God's help, we will conquer this malady that afflicts us. Thank you, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during my last communication to this House on the 29th of January, 2020, we discussed the pneumonia that developed as a result of an unknown cause in Wuhan City in Hubei Province, China, which was reported to the World Health Organization on the 31st of December, 2019. The pneumonia was later said to be caused by a novel coronavirus the world had never seen before. Mr. Speaker, so much has happened in such a short time. One day after my communication, the outbreak of the novel coronavirus was declared a public health emergency of international concern. By the 11th of February, 2020, WHO had announced the name for this new coronavirus disease, COVID-19. And just 30 days later, a week ago, while speaking at the COVID-19 media briefing, the WHO Director General declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And he said, "We have never before seen a pandemic sparked by a coronavirus. And as we have never before seen a pandemic that can be controlled at the same time." As many watch global events unfold, confirmed cases after confirmed cases were popping up all over the globe. And as of today, some 170 countries, including most in the Caribbean, have confirmed cases reported. This Ministry of Health prepared for what was considered to be inevitable, that a COVID-19 case would soon find its way to our inviting and beautiful shores. As of 12 noon today, Mr. Speaker, some 208,000 cases have been confirmed around the world, and some 8,312 people have died. 117,000 people remain actively infected, but The good news is that some 110,830 of them have mild manifestations and 6,439 serious or critical. You will recall that on the 15th of March 2020, the Ministry of Health reported its first COVID-19 case, and that 61-year-old Bahamian female has been outlined in the communication by the honorable member from Killarney. This patient had no travel history outside of the country in the 20 days prior to her presentation. She was referred to PMH. She was admitted. The National Reference Laboratory confirmed a positive result in the late hours of the 14th of March 2020. And 3 days later, she continues to be monitored in isolation at Princess Margaret Hospital, and she is in stable clinical condition. Many health professionals and other Bahamians are working very hard, often long hours, to limit the spread of COVID-19. The ministry's surveillance unit has aggressively undertaken contact tracing activities for this case. And as mentioned this morning, last evening we confirmed 2 additional cases through contact tracing. Today we began the task of doing the contact tracing on those positive cases. So, Mr. Speaker, this first case triggered the operationalization of our health disaster plan and the full activation of the Health Emergency Operations Center, our EOC. Now that we have transitioned from preparedness mode to response mode, let me share some of the ministry's mitigation actions. We have retooled health services to redirect staff to enhance our COVID-19 response. We have modified our existing protocols. We have manned a 24-hour hotline to ensure that the public has an avenue to ask COVID-19 related questions or to convey concerns. We have redoubled efforts to ensure adequate needed supplies, and in particular, personal protective equipment supplies and test kits. We have augmented public messaging to educate the public. We've embedded advanced policy recommendations to bolster the social, labor, educational, and economic response within a national COVID-19 coordinating mechanism. I am pleased to report, Mr. Speaker, that the dedicated national COVID website went live a few minutes ago. You can find it at covid19bahamas.gov.bs or covid19.gov.bs. We have formalized plans to take services to the public in our communities. We have enhanced testing capacity, and we can confirm that we have an additional 750 test kits in country at this time, and we have ordered an additional 5,000 to 6,000, 750 in country right now. And we have ordered an additional 5,000 to 6,000. We have tested suspected cases and close contacts of confirmed cases. And we have seen to it that we have had enhanced collaboration between the public health system and the private sector for enhanced treatment capacity and the installation of a modular unit at Princess Margaret Hospital. Mr. Speaker, the steps we take now and in the days ahead will determine the degree of spread of coronavirus in the Bahamas. We all have a role to play. We strongly urge all Bahamians to follow proven public health advice by closely adhering to the following recommendations. 1, we want you to maintain a distance of at least 3 to 6 feet between you and others. This is what we mean by social distancing. And in practical terms, that means you should avoid recreational and leisure activities involving large crowds, play dates, in-person meetings, and public transportation, all to be avoided. You should disinfect surfaces regularly. Examples of these include work surfaces, phones, light switches, doorknobs, play toys, tables, and floors. Wash your hands with soap and water. And if you do not have access to washing facilities, Use hand sanitizers with at least 65% alcohol content. Avoid unnecessary travel. Stay home if you're sick. Stay home if you are at higher risk of being infected with COVID-19. These people include the elderly, those who have diabetes, hypertension, lung conditions such as asthma, persons with heart disease and kidney disease. And this also refers to those who already have a weakened immune system, such as cancer patients, those on high-dose steroids, pregnant women, and those who are morbidly obese. Mr. Speaker, every healthcare professional, allied, auxiliary, administrative, clerical, and clinical staff in this fight stand ready with his or her shield to help the Bahamas to fight this rapidly spreading disease. And these frontline staff members are to be commended for their dedication and willingness to serve no matter the conditions posed. I am so proud of them. As I close, I'm reminded that Albert Einstein said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. As all other countries around the globe, the Bahamas too must strike a balance to protect the health, the economy, the social and human rights of every Bahamian. And as each new and evolving situation raises its ugly head, as it seems to be doing rapidly, this Ministry of Health, as a part of this government, stands resolute to tackle each issue one at a time. We will be unyielding in our pursuit to protect the health of this nation. So stay safe, Bahamas. Adhere closely to the recommended and proven health tips, but do not panic. By the grace of God, we will get through this together, and we will assist those who need help in this most trying time in our nation's history. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable member, while you are still on your feet, just a question. With respect to the elderly that you referred to, what is the minimum age of the elderly?
Mr. Speaker, I speak as a clinician. Unfortunately, the definition of elderly is 60 and above.
16?
60, 60. For the purposes of identifying those persons at risk for COVID-19, we use the cutoff of 60 years of age.
60 years of age.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
So those of us who are 60 and above are at risk and should shut it down.
I believe that you should exercise extreme care and caution, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. You have a question? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Pine Ridge. You have a question, honorable member?
Just curious, Seabreeze, what's the status for Grand Bahama? I didn't hear anything about Elizabeth. Sorry, I didn't hear anything particularly about Grand Bahama, considering that it's the second largest population, and people are concerned whether or not if they can get testing, and then of course that extends throughout the Family Islands as well.
Thank you, honorable member. Through you, Mr. Speaker. Every single Bahamian has access to testing. Our community health surveillance teams are able to move throughout the islands of the Bahamas. The testing has to be done in New Providence, however. So tests will be obtained from suspected patients, then brought into the capital. As you can imagine, this is real-time polymerase chain reaction testing, which is we have to get the RNA out of the specimen. That is done by the National Reference Lab in New Providence. So testing can be done of everybody in the Bahamas, but it has to be done in New Providence.
Honorable member. Thank you very much, honorable member, for Elizabeth. Order that the document, the communication by the honorable member, do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Carmichael.
Speaker, I rise for a very, very short communication. The member for Kalani, the most honorable Prime Minister, this morning tabled the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Regulations 2020. These are regulations that are promulgated by the Governor General. In section 19A, ends with the word or, and then it goes on to B. There was a need that the opposition and the government recognized to change the word or to and. And so in this communication, sir, I rise to table the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Regulations Amendment to simply make that simple amendment to one word. Change the word or, where it appears in section 19, to and. I want to thank the members for Cat Island and the member for Exuma for discussing this with us, discussing the implications and appreciating the significance of it and sharing with us. Mr. Speaker, I'm simply going to table this amendment. And it did not have to be tabled because the Interpretation and General Clauses Act gives us 14 days to do so, but I want to ensure that we clear up everything, ensure that there's full clarity.
Yes. Honorable members from the opposition. You have no objection. Thank you. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
Mr. Speaker, this will likely be one of the most painful speeches I will ever have to make in this place. Mr. Speaker, as most Bahamians know, the core mission of the Ministry of Tourism is to attract as many foreign visitors to our country as we can and provide them with exceptional experiences during their stay. It is indeed my mandate as the country's Minister of Tourism to ensure our tourism product is a global industry leader and one that contributes sustainably to a thriving national economy. The Bahamas' reliance on travel and tourism for economic growth is well known and unprecedented within the region. We are, in fact, according to the Inter-American Development Bank, one of the most tourism-dependent economies in the world. Mr. Speaker, in years of plenty, these have proven rejoiceful words. Over the past decade, we've been blessed with the good fortune that year after year, tourism has steadily improved, even as hurricanes battered our shores and political uncertainty shook countries around the world. Our lands have brought forth abundantly. In 2018, tourism's direct contribution to GDP was the highest in the region at 40.4% and accounted for 48% of total direct employment. The Ministry of Tourism statistics indicate that with the record arrival of some 7.2 million visitors in 2019, our industry had its best year ever. Our air arrivals grew by 6.7%, our cruise traffic grew by 10.3%, and our total arrivals grew by 9.4%. Unprecedented and historic. Despite slower than anticipated air arrivals in January 2020, overall arrivals had increased by 7.9%, mostly attributable to cruise arrivals. When you discount the effects of Abaco and Grand Bahama, we were well on our way to an accelerated recovery in our other islands, vastly ahead of schedule. Mr. Speaker, until COVID-19's rapid an uncertain spread throughout much of the world, our thriving tourism industry, the engine driving much of the Bahamas' continued growth, showed no signs of slowing down. We were poised for another year of success, another year of growth, another year of plenty. Which is why it pains me deeply to stand in front of you all and recognize that around the world, tourism is shutting down. The World Travel and Tourism Council estimates that some 50 million jobs are at risk worldwide in the tourism sector. Global travel is set to shrink by 25%. Huge. And countries around the world, including ours, are actively closing their borders. Quite simply, the tourism industry worldwide faces a significant, some would even say, catastrophic collapse in the near term. One only need look at our forward booking data, which reveals absolutely no bookings for the foreseeable future as potential vacationers retreat into their homes, worrying about the uncertainty of their own short-term economic prospects and pushing any thought of any type of vacation out of their realistic realm of possibility. Mr. Speaker, international travel restrictions, airline and event cancellations, and the perceived risks of global travel, even as the world comes to grips with COVID-19, will significantly slow the Bahamas' economic turnaround. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the Bahamas, aligning itself with the recommendation of the World Health Organization, has implemented tighter and tighter border control and quarantine measures for persons traveling from infected areas. Tomorrow, increased travel restrictions designed to protect the health of Bahamian nationals and residents will come into effect. All non-resident persons who have, within the last 20 days, traveled from the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Europe will be prohibited entry into the Bahamas. This policy will be enforced at a minimum for the next 30 days and will be modified as needed. These measures do not replace, but complement restrictions already in place for travel from China, Iran, Italy, and South Korea. Of course, Bahamian citizens and residents will always be allowed to return home, subject to immediate quarantine requirements. It is fundamental that we as Bahamians understand both the short and long-term impacts COVID-19 will have on our tourism industry. Life as we know it will be fundamentally uprooted for the next 30 to 60 days. To convince ourselves otherwise would be a profound detriment to the collective struggle we as Bahamians have begun to mount and will continue to mount against COVID-19 in the coming months. Mr. Speaker, we must be candid, forthright, and brutally honest with ourselves about what the next 1 to 2 months will look like. Hotels will be vacant, ports will be deserted, streets will be empty. The lifeblood of our country will be devoid of the many millions of foreign visitors that are so economically impactful in our everyday lives. We are facing an economic calamity that will almost certainly exceed that of Hurricane Dorian, the most powerful hurricane to ever strike the Bahamas. The extent of the impact this crisis will have both on our tourism industry and national economy will be determined by two key factors. One, the rate of the domestic outbreak we can control. We are directly accountable for the spread of the virus in our communities. We are directly accountable for the spread of the virus in our communities. And it is therefore incumbent upon each and every Bahamian to follow the exhaustive protocols issued by the Ministry of Health. Wash your hands often. Do not touch your face. Practice social distancing, like we are attempting to do in these hallowed halls, all day, every day. Do not gather in groups, whether they be in bars, restaurants, movie theaters, or churches. And self-quarantine. Do not come out of your home. Separate yourself from the rest of your family if you start to feel flu-like or have been exposed to someone who has tested positive for the coronavirus. The other determining factor on the impact of this outbreak on the Bahamas is external demand shocks, which sadly we cannot control. As countries continue to manage their own outbreaks by closing borders, imposing curfews and quarantines, and canceling events, demand for travel becomes almost non-existent. Mr. Speaker, to understand the scope of the long-term impact, we need to first understand China's outsized importance in the global economy and how its own economic slowdown will jeopardize global growth. Oxford Tourism, a subsidiary of Oxford Economics, the world-renowned forecasting and analytics firm, notes that just 5 short weeks ago, China boasted the world's third largest international aviation market. Today, it ranks 25th, with nearly 2/3 of all travel to and from the region canceled for the foreseeable future. As a result, global trade implications have plummeted, with US stock and other world markets facing never-before-seen volatility. Some pundits even opine that another global recession may very well be on the horizon, although I feel to rebuke them in the name of tourism. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we must also closely monitor the airline industry. The International Air Transport Association, IATA, estimates that airlines have already lost $113 billion as a result of COVID-19. This number does not even take into account the recent travel restrictions imposed by the US and Canada on European travel, suggesting that losses will rise to unfathomable figures. I must impress upon this chamber and all of our residents that this situation is constantly evolving. It requires our local response indeed be proportionate, measured, and practical, such that we may recover in a reasonably short period of time. The level of containment and duration of the outbreak in our key markets, most notably the US, will ultimately determine the eventual impact on our tourism infrastructure. However, economic modeling by the United Nations World Tourism Organization reveals that the impact of COVID-19 on the global tourism industry is continually evolving. It is far too early to definitively determine the full economic impact. I can promise you, however, that the results will be an incredibly challenging reality for this industry to come to terms with. Mr. Speaker, as COVID-19 continues to spread uncertainty and stoke fear around the globe, the Bahamas is confronted with the extraordinary vulnerability owing to our pronounced reliance both on the United States and cruise lines. Indeed, the member for Kalani has highlighted that some 82% of stopover visitors hail from a country which is slowly closing itself off to the world, while 75% of our foreign visitor arrivals depends on a cruise industry which has entirely ceased operations. While the Bahamas has in the past weathered smaller shocks, the global financial crisis, Zika, and Hurricane Dorian, critically important to this recovery effort will be the country's response to limiting the outbreak. However, Mr. Speaker, the government of the Bahamas cannot face this crisis alone. In these extraordinary times, we, alongside each and every Bahamian, shoulder the same burden of responsibility as stakeholders in our nation's health, security, and continued well-being. Employers and employees must embody a shared sense of strength and resiliency in the face of the unknown. Indeed, it will be one of mutual sacrifice, and we sincerely hope and pray that employers in the tourism sector will try as best as they can to provide whatever help that they can to their loyal, hardworking, particularly vulnerable staff as we weather this COVID-19 crisis. The simple yet inconceivable reality we all need to grasp is that there will be no tourists. It will be 1 week ago, the Bahamas featured in the most recent travel market report as the safest country to travel to within the Caribbean amidst the spread of the virus. Then the US rolled out its new travel restrictions, and this led to a mass exodus of foreign visitors wishing to return home to avoid being locked out by any sudden change in travel rules to the Bahamas. In fact, when asked by reporters yesterday whether Americans should continue to travel to the Caribbean and Mexico, President Donald Trump strongly advised his citizens to stay at home in their house until further notice. I predict that on the back of such announcements, hotel occupancies will rapidly trend down as the travel bans, airport closures, and border shutdowns become the new norm. Mr. Speaker, our tourism industry will be strained to its very core. A prolonged crisis in our crucial international markets and the corresponding collapse of our key airline partners augur extremely challenging times ahead. The Bahamas is particularly sensitive to the fate of the airline industry, as some 85% of all stopover business is generated from travelers within U.S. markets traveling on either American Airlines, Delta, JetBlue, United, Silver, and Southwest. It therefore prompts great concern when airline stocks continue to plummet, and American and Delta, two airlines which have captured the lion's share of the market in the Bahamas, have already announced deep cuts amid precipitous declines in demand and government-imposed restrictions. Over the past week, the Ministry of Tourism has remained in constant communication with these and other airlines such that we may be kept abreast of ongoing developments. Mr. Speaker, allow me to share what we currently know about their plans. On Sunday, March the 15th, American Airlines announced it will continue its short-haul flights to the Caribbean, but in responses to decreased demand and the U.S. government's COVID-19 travel restrictions, the airline will undergo a phased suspension of flights with a 75% capacity decrease from March the 16th through May the 6th. Domestic capacity will reduce by 20% in April and 30% in May. On Tuesday, March the 10th, Delta declared it would reduce international capacity by 25%, eliminating travel on some 40% of its routes. Most U.S.-based carriers have announced that they will continue with essential travel only, but have suspended fees for flight changes and cancellations in order to facilitate future travel once this crisis is behind us. Mr. Speaker, the news from our second largest market, Canada, is equally disheartening. The Canadian government proclaimed on Friday, March the 13th, that Canadians should avoid all non-essential travel outside of Canada. Only a few of its airports are open to receive international flights. Each of its three major airlines, Air Canada, Sunwing, and WestJet, have suspended or greatly reduced flights to the Caribbean. As of tomorrow, March the 19th, both British Airways into Nassau from the UK and Air Carib into San Salvador from Paris will suspend operations. British Airways, though more financially secure than its US-based counterparts, plans to cut capacity by 75% in April and May to remain solvent during the outbreak. The situation may well prove catastrophic for long-haul air travel. Without financial support from governments and coordinated industry action on bailouts, most European airlines and charters could experience bankruptcy by the end of May. Mr. Speaker, no industry is immune from the widespread, insidious effects of COVID-19. The cruise lines are undergoing similar retrenchment and have either scaled back or suspended their sailings entirely for at least the next 30 days. Norwegian cruise lines have suspended sailing from March the 13th through April the 11th. Royal Caribbean Cruise announced on March the 14th it will suspend operations for 30 days. Carnival has paused its North American operations and will resume on April the 10th. Disney Cruise Lines has suspended sailing from March the 14th through the end of the month. Princess Cruises has announced a voluntary halt in operations across its entire fleet for 2 months between March the 12th and May the 10th. And MSC has canceled all U.S. cruises until April the 30th. Every month, the cruise ships remain in port, completely shut down. 450,000 foreign visitors are not coming to the Bahamas, creating the economic impact that supports the lives of many ordinary Bahamians. Don't mind the ships you see parked at the Prince George Wharf. They are without passengers, simply waiting to be reactivated. Mr. Speaker, we cannot sit here this morning only as politicians. We are mothers, fathers, ourselves children of this great nation. We are each uniquely blessed to call ourselves Bahamian. And as Bahamians, we have pledged to one another, from the rolling salt hills of Matthewtown to the blue waters of Walker's Key, to act as one people united in love and service. As the world continues to react to the abrupt halting of the engines driving tourism around the globe, I wish to assure you and the public that this ministry will not sit idly by. We will not be spectators, even as the curtains of uncertainty draw to their inevitable close. We will face the darkness with steadfast determination and unwavering commitment to the Bahamian people. We will not be bystanders. This ministry is acutely aware of what it takes to respond in the face of disaster, and we will be ready to let the world know that the Bahamas is open for business once again when this pandemic is behind us. I'm extremely heartened by the unique qualities of the Bahamas that will serve us well as we emerge from the ravages of this COVID-19 phenomenon. Our location, the closest country to the 3 largest cruise ports in the world, and our diversity of product, private islands versus Nassau and Freeport, will serve us well as the cruise industry begins to fire back up. I envision potential travelers being quickly tempted back to vacationing on a cruise ship for a short 3-day cruise at the outset, which is the core product of our cruise industry given our proximity to South Florida. Mr. Speaker, once again, our location should also help the more lucrative air rivals to rebound fairly quickly, maybe not at the outset to pre-Dorian/COVID-19 levels, but bounce back nonetheless, because I believe potential vacationers will not want to travel too far from home, and certainly not to cities where populations and living conditions are dense, and the perceived possibility of infection will remain real. They will want to test the waters, make sure things are safe by making a visit to a warm weather, low population density destination that is close to home, easy to return from if any calamity should occur, and one where much of the experience is outdoors, appropriately social distance to limit any potential health implications. Mr. Speaker, despite the fairly dire report of the state of affairs in tourism, I remain, over the long term, incredibly optimistic. Yes, the situation will get worse over the next 2 to 3 months, but one thing I've come to realize in my 3 short years in this job is that the tourism industry in the Bahamas is incredibly resilient, always bouncing back better and stronger, no matter what calamity or crisis is thrown its way. We have an incredible product. We have a beautiful country. And we have an awesome people. And that bodes us well for when we get on the other side of this crisis. Mr. Speaker, we will not be naysayers. This Bahamas Ministry of Tourism will be ready immediately when the curtains are dusted off and torn open, so the light of this beautiful country might shine even brighter as we let the world know the Bahamas is still rocking. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by members. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, at this stage, there are no further communications by ministers. Mr. Speaker, I do now move the business of this House, Mr. Speaker, will be suspended until 10 a.m. Monday, the 30th of March.
Monday?
Monday.
Okay.
The 30th of March. Mr. Speaker, we're suspending because Monday, the 30th of March is within the 14 days. We could come back on Wednesday, April 1st, which is April Fool's Day, but we are seeing the seriousness of what we are in, Mr. Speaker. We will be coming back on Monday, the 30th of March at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Is there a seconder?
A seconder, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member, a motion is on the floor. Honourable Members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 10 a.m. Monday, the 30th of March. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 10 a.m. Monday, the 30th of March.
All right.